All right.
Yeah.
Can you guys see my screen? Okay. Cool. So we'll start off. So what is HTML? HTML is a hypertext markup language that is used to have more than just sitting text on a page. We can have images, links, tables, lists. Essentially, it's going to be what you see on the web and how we design it. So like an outline of what your website's going to look like. First, we'll go ahead and discuss the HTML document structure. So if you've seen before, and I'm just in my text editor, I have the VS Code. Oops, hold on. Okay, so if we look at any HTML file, you're going to see this following structure, and this is a skeleton of any HTML document. So first we have our doc type, which is essentially saying this is a document and it's type of HTML. And then we begin our HTML tags. So everything written in here, in between these two tags, will be HTML. And you'll see tags like this commonly in HTML. Well, this is considered the opening tag, and this is considered the closing tag. The closing tag has the / after the little caret, and every HTML element, except for a handful of them, will have a closing tag. So whenever you begin an element, you want to make sure that you close it. So inside of the HTML, we'll have our head. Inside of the head tag is where you're going to put your title. So that is when you're looking at a website and you look at the tab and it says a name, that's where the title is. So if we look at a website, let's see. We go to google.com, for instance. You see right here it says Google. So what that means in the code is that whoever coded that site wrote Google right here. So the title is what you see on the tab, and everything in the head is not seen on the browser. So this is where you put your like meta tags, where you put links to other files, like other CSS files or JavaScript files. This is how they link together and communicate. You put it in between the head tag. After the head tag, is there a question? All right, and then after your head tag, you're going to have your body tag. This is where you're going to write the majority of your code is between your body tag. This is what's seen in the browser. So if we look at the website, all of this was written within the body tag. Right, so this right here is going to be the structure of all of your HTML files. Of course, you're going to have things written within your body that you'll change, like heading tags, header tags, footers, articles, sections, things of that nature. So commonly within a body tag, you will see a header tag. And this is new to HTML5. It wasn't there prior, but essentially inside of the header tag, that's the top of the page. So you'll only have one header tag per HTML file. And its counterpart is the footer tag. So this is normally on a website where you see like social media links or like find more information or find jobs, things of that nature. Yeah. And inside of the header, if we go back there, you'll normally see a nav tag. And that's your navigation. Do we have any questions so far? Everyone's good? All right, cool. So then this is essentially the structure of every HTML with just a little bit more. All right, so we'll go ahead and go back. So that's the HTML document structure. And within that, you'll have...
Excuse me.
Yep.
I did have a question. Can you go a little bit more into that structure?
why do we need the header? Why is nav in header? And can you just describe a little bit more about what you're thinking in terms of using those new tags?
Yeah, so the header tag is like the top of the page. So you are saying you're dedicating that region to the top of the page. So normally at the top of a page, and the navigation doesn't have to go inside of there, it's just common practice. But essentially, you know, at the top of the page, you have your navigation that takes you to different pages of the site. So the header is like when you're reading a newspaper article and you have that top part that is listing out the different sections and the heading of like the next coming article. That's how you can think. Oh, that's how you can think of the header. And then inside of that is where you're going to have your navigation, kind of telling people where they can go throughout the site. So like an about me page or contact page, things of that nature.
Okay, I'm still having a little bit of trouble visualizing. Is it possible we can look at a real website and you can explain to us a little bit what header typically or best practices we look at? Like a Starbucks, maybe a Starbucks website, something that is pretty common used or something. So we can actually visualize what it looks like.
So right here, this white part right here. This is the header, and inside of it is the navigation. So this part where we're highlighting and going to different sections of the site, that's the navigation, and this white part is the header. So it's at the top of the page.
What about the green part on the very top? Is that also part of the header?
Yeah, that's most likely part of the header, and then they just have it styled like that.
All right, thank you.
No problem. All right, any other questions? All right, we'll continue. So next we'll go ahead and discuss structure elements. So these are the elements that you put inside those body tags that I was talking about. So we have div, which is used to create a generic container for content. Essentially, visually, you can't see anything with the div, but what it does is it divides the page. So essentially every time you have like a new section, or if we go back to the Starbucks example here, you see that this has the background color pink, this one's black, this one's white, and so on and so forth. Each of these is probably a div. So this is one division, this is another division, this is another division. We also have our header tags, which I just discussed is new to HTML5 and is used to mark the header part of the body. You'll have one of those per document. Counterpart to the header is the footer, which outlines the footer content in the document. So that's at the very bottom of the page where you'll see the social media links and things of that nature. Nav is used to mark up the navigation area, and section provides structure around a block of content, grouping in a logical format. So section and div are kind of similar in that sense. So you can kind of switch those around. So if we go back to our code here and I wanted to add a couple of sections, we can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to have 3 sections on this page. And you can have as many as you like. Right? Within that, you'll have your content elements. So you have heading tags, which you'll see very commonly, and it goes from H1 through H6. And H1 being the largest, so if you see an H1 font, so let's say in this section, I want to have a heading, and I'm just going to build a mini portfolio page. And in this section, I'm going to say about me. In this section, I'll have, my skills. This one I'll have, and I'll have like my portfolio.
and then just go ahead and click it.
So if we look at this here, on a site,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then,
you can see I have my headings here. So then contrastly, if I put like H6, you can see the difference.
okay. Go ahead and click it again.
See how H1 is much larger than H6.
Perfect.
You also have paragraph elements, which is essentially just like paragraph text. Italicize, EM versus I. EM is treated as important. It's an emphasis. For sites that have a toggle between normal view and like visually impaired view, EM is going to appear differently. But to us, it's going to look the same. It's just going to look like italicize. Bold is represented by the strong tag. An ordered list is OL, which stands for ordered list, and then inside of that, you're going to have your list item. So if we look at an ordered list, so let's look at my skills. Here, I'm going to start an ordered list. So I'll start off with my opening OL tag and then my closing OL tag. So that's the end of it. Inside of there, I'm going to have my list items. So let's say I say JavaScript. It's one of my skills. I'll say Ruby is another skill I have. And I'll say SQL.
You have to do it.
And if we look at that, you can see on the site, it's going to appear as 1, 2, 3 on here because it's an ordered list. So if we look at that here and refresh, we see 1, 2, 3. The same is for unordered lists, except instead of numbers, it's just going to be bullet points, but the format remains the same. So instead of OL, it's going to be UL. List items remain the same. If we look at that, you can see the dots there that are representative of an unordered list.
Yeah, I didn't see it linked to that HTML file.
Right? Oops. Next, we are going to be talking about images. So if you want to add an image to your page, you would simply use the image tag. So let's say on my About Me, I wanted to add an image of myself. Now, images are special in the sense that they do not have a closing tag. They are self-closing, so they do not need this. It's just all by itself. But what they do have is an attribute. An attribute you can think of like a property or a characteristic or something of that nature. The attribute that the image tag has is source, which is represented by SRC. The source is essentially telling it what the image is, like where is the source of this image. You set that equal, and inside of quotations is where you're going to put either the file path or the absolute URL. So what I mean by that is, like, let's pretend in this folder that I have my index.html, I have another file that's some image. Let's just pretend it's called image.png. So I can just put image.png, and what this is going to do, it's going to go to my root directory, which is the main folder where all your files is in, and it's going to look for a file called image.png. Now, if there was a file there, then it would pull up the image and put it in there. Another way that you could do it is using a website. So let's say you take a picture from online. So let's just look at an online picture. Go to Google and say I want to put puppies on there. If we go to our images, we can just right-click an image and then copy image address. And what I like to do is I like to open a tab and paste that image address just to make sure that it works. So I put it in there and it does work. So I'm going to go ahead and put that same address into my code. So in between the quotations, I can put that address and I'll save it. It's a really long one, but wow. All right, but it's in there. So we save that, and if we go back to our file, there it is. Does anyone have any questions so far? Nope. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. Next, we have our anchor tag. So an anchor tag is essentially used for linking. So when you're looking at a website and you click on something and it takes you to another website or another part of the page or to another page in the website, you're using an anchor tag. So that's what you're going to use inside of your navigation. And you can also do nesting, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So let's say I had different files that I wanted to go to on my page. Like let's say I had, instead of these sections, I had them as pages. Like I had an About Me page, I had a My Skills page, I had a My Portfolio page, I had a Contact page. So inside of my navigation, I would use anchor tags to represent that. So I would have my opening and closing A, which stands for anchor. Now, anchor tags have attributes as well. The attribute that it has is href, which is similar to source in the sense that where is this file? Where are you taking me? So in here, just like image tags, you can put a local file that exists in your root directory. So let's say I had another HTML file that was called aboutme.html. So I'm going to say aboutme.html, and then in between my opening and closing tag right there, I'm going to write some text about me. Now, this text about me becomes clickable, and when I click it, it should take me to aboutme.html. So let's go see how this looks. So right here, you can see it's about me, it looks clickable, we can go ahead and click that. And then here, it took me to aboutme.html. That file doesn't exist, so that's why I'm getting this error message. But I can do the same as far as going to a website. So I can replace this with a website. So let's say we want to go to direct them to Starbucks. I can put the entire URL inside of this href attribute. And now I could put some other text.
So go behind the parentheses.
So if we look at my page, it says click here for coffee. Click there. And it takes me to Starbucks. Now, if you wanted the link to open up in a new tab, and let's say you wanted to keep them on your website, but just open it in a new tab, then in your opening anchor tag, you'll add a second attribute, which is called target, and you'll set that equal to, and anytime you set anything equal to anything inside of an opening tag, you're going to be using quotations. So inside of quotations, we will put underscore blank, and that will open this link in a new tab. So if we go back and click on it again, you see that it has opened up in a new tab. Any questions so far? All right, we'll keep going. Oh,
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
What program are you using?
I'm using Visual Studio Code.
Does the student need to download all of that? Because I know how to like script a page, but
Yeah,
I don't know.
if you can go to code.visualstudio.com, and it's completely free, and you can go ahead and download that. And then it has a lot of built-in extensions that are going to be really helpful once you get deeper into the curriculum.
Do we have to pay for it later on? No.
No, it's free. It's completely free.
Okay, so it's called Visual Studio Doc. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right, so we'll keep on trucking here. Next, we'll go ahead and jump to CSS. So what is CSS? It's a cascading style sheet. It was developed as a way to style the HTML and create usable styles, also called rules. These styles or rules can be added directly to an HTML file by using the style element, or they can be added to a separate CSS file and then link to the HTML file. So what that means is essentially I can create a style tag. And inside of here, I can write some CSS code, and then it would be applied to the whole HTML file. But we're not going to go ahead and learn that way. What we're going to learn is how to use an external style sheet, because that's what's common practice. And you want to be able to separate your file. So it's HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It's a lot cleaner. It's a lot easier to read. And if you ever have to make changes, it will be a lot easier for you. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and create a CSS file. So I have my separate CSS file. Now, the way to link these two files together is we're going to go back to the head tag, because that's where we do all of our linking, and we're going to use a link tag. Link is a special tag in the sense that it doesn't require a closing. So here, we'll put link, and it's going to have some attributes. The first attribute is going to be REL, relation, and the relation that this has to this HTML file is style sheet. Next, we're going to do href, similar to anchor tag. We're going to tell it where it is. It's in our root directory, and it has its file name, so we're going to just put style.css. So here, we are linking a style sheet, and this is where we can find it. So if we go to the root directory, we can see that style.css is there. So now these two are connected. They can communicate with each other. So whatever code I write in here is now going to be applied to here. CSS is called cascading because the styles from a parent element also apply to its descendants. The styles cascade down the element tree from the parent element to its children and descendants, much like a family tree. So essentially what that's saying is just like your parents pass on their genes to you, the CSS is cascading in that sense. So if I applied a style to body, say body, and the way that CSS is written is you write what you want to target, and then in this case I want to target the element body, and then you have a set of curly brackets, and inside of the curly brackets is where you're going to write your property and the value of that property. So let's say I wanted to change the background color. I'm going to use background color, and I want it to be blue.
Oh, there we go.
And then you're going to want to end every property with a semicolon. So here, the background color is going to be blue. Anything within these body tags is going to have the background color blue. So that means all of this will have the background color blue. So if we look at our site,
Yeah, no problem. Are you open today?
everything is blue. CSS properties. So the first property that we're going to discuss is the display property. Display has 4 different values. We have display block, inline, and none. So block makes the element a block in the sense that it won't let anything sit next to it on the page. So let's say you have a couple of images in a row. If you have display block as a property for your image rule, then it's going to be like 1 image per line. Display inline block makes the element a block, but it will allow other elements to sit next to it on the same line. So you can think of it as like they're in their own little worlds, but they're right next to each other. So there's still like a little bit of space between them, but they're able to sit next to each other. Display inline makes the element sit on the same line as another element, but without formatting it like a block. So instead of that space, they're going to be right next to each other. So you'll have like an image right next to each other without any space. Display none makes everything disappear. So you won't even see it on the page. It exists in the code, but it doesn't appear on the page. Questions on display? All right, we'll keep going. Position property. So position is a little bit weird and it's something that you'll get used to after a lot of trial and error with CSS. Is we have position absolute. The element is positioned relative to its first positioned, not static. Static, it's the default.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry. From the last page when you talked about inline, I noticed sometimes if you put a number of things inline and I guess you float them, whatever, it seems to throw the flow off. Can you explain why it does that? I mean, if you start using inline, then you'll see that your HTML, your blocks will start to be out of order or anything. Do you know anything about why that happens?
It depends on how everything else is set up and what other properties you have set in your CSS. CSS is kind of like an art form in the sense that you can approach one problem in a lot of different ways. As far as the inline, what I do to kind of avoid that issues is I'll put, let's say you have a set of images together, I'll put that set of images inside of a div and that will concentrate it into one area, and then the inline should be lined up the way that you want. Another property that is really popular is Flexbox, and there's a really great site that allows you to play with Flexbox, which I kind of like as an alternative to display. It's called Flexbox Froggy. And it is an interactive game that teaches you Flexbox, and it's a lot easier than messing around with display and position. It kind of combines those two together in a much easier format. So I personally like to use Flexbox, but you will see display and position in a lot of places, so it's good to be familiar with it. But when you have time, I would highly recommend playing with Flexbox Froggy so you can get familiar with Flexbox and kind of use that in your code because it's like what's up and coming. But as far as the display inline messing up everything, it's really dependent on all the other properties that you have set in there and how your HTML is written.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right, so then if we go back to position static is the default value. So every time we write some code, it is already automatically defaulted value is position static. Position relative is the element is positioned relative to its normal position. So left 20 pixels adds 20 pixels to the element's left position. And we can see that with image here. So if we play with our image, oops. And I say, oh wait, I did that wrong, sorry. We see that it moved. So it added 20 pixels to the left of the image. If we want to see something more dramatic, we can add like 200. You see that it added 200 pixels to the left. Position fixed means the element is positioned relative to the browser window. So depending on when you like resize your window on a browser, the position will always remain in that spot relative to the window size. Next, we'll go ahead and discuss our CSS box model. So this is very important to remember. I would highly recommend like bookmarking it or printing it out when you're dealing with your CSS. So when you're playing around with CSS, you'll realize you'll type in some properties and you think it's going to be in one spot, but it turns out to be in a completely different spot. It's probably because of the box model and how you're playing with that. So inside of here is the content area. So that's your HTML tag. So if we look at the image, that's the image of the puppy. So within that content area, you have a height and width, and you can adjust the height and width of that image. Outside of that is you have padding. You have top, right, bottom, left. So you can adjust all of these separately. So let's say you want your padding right to be smaller than your left, or your top less than your bottom. You can do that. Or you can write padding and that will cover all of them. Outside of the padding, you have your border, top, right, bottom, left, same thing. Outside of that, margin. So there's all of these elements that take into consideration when you are positioning or styling your CSS and your HTML content. So with that, we can mess with padding, we can mess with border, we can mess with margin. So if we mess with that inside of our image, let's say we have padding, I want to add 50 pixels to my padding. I want to add 100 pixels to my margin. And we can see how it moves. So it added all of this space because it's encompassing around the image. Any questions about the box model?
Yes. Going back to what you were saying, position. If you have that as relative and you say left or right, whatever, when you move that, do you move the entire box model or do you just move part of the box model?
So when I move what, am I moving the box model?
Yeah, if you go back to position and you say position is relative, then you say left 20 pixels, does it move the entire box model or does it just move a portion of the box model?
So it's going to move the entire thing because we're adding the position. So the position outside of this box model. So the position of this entire thing, we're going to move the whole box model over.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no problem. All right, so the next thing we're going to be discussing, and this will be the last topic of the day, is classes versus IDs. So in our code, we see that we can target an entire element, but we can also target classes and IDs. So let's say we have all these H1 tags, right? So let's pretend that I wanted this H1 tag to be a different color than the rest. So if I put H1, and I want the color to be white, we can see in my code that all the H1s turn the color white. But let's say I just wanted the My Skills to be a different color. I'm going to go ahead and use a class. I'm going to say class equals different. So this is the name of my class right here, what I'm setting it equal to. You can name it whatever you like. But for naming conventions, if it's like a two-worded name, you're going to want to use an underscore. So different class, if you did that. You don't want to use spaces. But then that is our class name is different. So when I'm targeting that in my CSS, I'm just going to use period and then the name of my class, which is different. And then inside of there, I'll have my CSS rule that I want. So I want the color to be red for that. So now what do you think is going to happen? Anybody?
The head class of my skills will be different color red.
Exactly. So if we
Just the actual my skill or my class or my skill will be red, not
exactly.
the whole thing.
Yep. So we can see that here. So with classes, you can apply that to multiple regions. So this class is just saying, I want my font color to be red. So if I wanted to apply that class to my list item JavaScript, I can reuse that. You see it's red. So classes are reusable, and they're going to be helpful when you're using like a common color theme and you want to reuse it in different sections. You can reuse those classes. So if we look at the Starbucks page, let's say that there was a class for these paragraph tags, right? And we wanted them to be white. So there they are. But there we have them black. So these would be different classes for these different paragraph tags. Same with the titles. So that's reusable code. IDs kind of work the same way in CSS, but you can't reuse them. There's only one ID per the entire document. Well, one of the same ID. You can have multiple IDs in the document, but you can't have like an ID called different and use it in multiple places. You only have one ID called different, and then you can have another ID called something else, and so on and so forth. So let's say if we had an ID, we say ID equals something. That's the name of my ID. Then in my CSS, I would put hashtag something. So you can see the difference here. With classes, we use a period. With IDs, we use a hashtag. And then we can change the color there. Well, I'll change the font size or something. So now that font will be different than the rest. And we see that it's bigger here. So the reason why IDs are only used once is once you start communicating with JavaScript, you'll be wanting to grab and pull elements from your HTML file, or maybe you want to grab some input. You're going to communicate to the HTML file by ID. So if there's multiple of the same ID, let's say I had an ID here called something as well, then it's going to break because your JavaScript is going to be looking for this ID something, and then it sees it twice and you're like, okay, which one do you want me to grab? So you want to only have one ID so that when you are using your JavaScript, it knows exactly what element you want to target. And for CSS, a great website that I like to use is W3 Schools as far as the properties and values that they can contain. So if you go to w3schools.com and go CSS, you'll see all here, display, padding, and it discusses all of those in a little greater detail and all the different values that you can have. So this is a great resource that coders still use even if they have years of experience, because there's so much CSS out there and there's so many properties that you can have and so many combinations of things. So that concludes our lecture for today. Does anyone have any questions?
Going back to your ID in your classes. So if you have multiple IDs in your class, but you don't have JavaScript, will the CSS styling still take for both instances or just one instance?
I believe it will still do it for both instances. I've never done that, so let's try it and see if it works or if it doesn't. Let's see. So here we have two IDs that are both something. We'll see if it applies. So it does apply. So in CSS, it doesn't matter. It still works the same way, but in JavaScript is where it's going to go crazy. But you want to avoid doing that because that's just going to lead to messy code.
Okay. Yeah. So the only other thing is that I'm still having a little bit of difficulty with the position. Is there a way you can quickly demo the different types of the position? You already demoed the relative one, but it's hard to see what's the difference between the absolute one and the status one. Is there a quick demo that you can take a look at that, or is that going to take a lot of
Yeah, well, let's play with it here. Let me make this site a little bit longer because it's hard to see when it's such a small little page. So we'll make it a little bit longer. So we had the position absolute. So it stayed there. It didn't go underneath or get on top of this. So you can see here. So it absolute, it stays there. That's where it lives. If we have fixed, it looks the same. But if we were to scroll down, like if the page was longer, this would stay here. And then if you had other elements, this would be on top of those elements. So it would kind of overlap, and that's probably something that you don't want. Static.
So you're saying, wait a minute. So you're saying fixed doesn't move even if you have like scroll bars? Am I hearing you right?
Correct. It's going to stay there.
Well, would absolute also just stay right one place regardless of whether they're scroll bars?
Absolute will stay there, but if there's scroll bars, you'll be able to scroll down. So that's just kind of relative.
With absolute.
Right. That's relative to your window browser. So like absolute means like, hey, it's going to be on this part of the page no matter the window size. And then static is the default value. So if you had nothing at all, this is the default value, is static. So if you don't have the position property written in your CSS, static is what the default value is. So technically you don't have to write position static because it already is. Any other questions? All right, well, if there's not any other questions, we'll go ahead and conclude lecture. I will be posting the recording, so if you want to rewatch it, you can. If you come up with questions later, feel free to message me on Slack or use the Slack channels that you're in. All right, everyone have a good day.